Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Corpse Club Horror BFFs. I am one of your Horror BFFs, Patrick Bromley, joined, as always, by my Horror BFF, Heather Wixson. Hey, Heather.
Hello, Patrick. I like that there's that slight pause where I could tell you've been podcasting a bit lately because you were like, wait, what show is this again?
It's like the stepfather when he's like, who am I? Who am I this time?
Who am I? Exactly. Who are you, Patrick?
Or who am I here, right? Is it who am I here? Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll find out who you are here as we move forward. But yes, I'm excited to be back chatting with you again so soon.
Yes.
Especially about this film in particular.
I am excited to talk about it, too. We are celebrating Class of 1980 all month long at dailydead.com. And so in conjunction with the Class of 1980 series, we are talking about Brian De Palma's 1980 thriller Dressed to Kill, released this month, 40 years ago.
This is an interesting one for me because it wasn't my first De Palma. But I definitely saw this movie way, way too young, thanks to my friend, Tyranny Isles.
Oh, that's right. So you have Nancy Allen commenting on Nancy Allen.
Yes, which is, I mean, what else do you really need?
That's so, it's so meta. What was your first De Palma?
It was Carrie.
Okay.
Yeah, Carrie, because they used to play Carrie a lot on like channel 50 or 66 when I was a kid. So I remember seeing that, like, the first time I ever saw Carrie was on, like, regular television, I guess. So obviously I didn't see the full version of it. But it's interesting, like, thinking about Carrie and then thinking about this film, because as much as this is very, very much like De Palma's take on a lot of the motifs in, like, Psycho, I think it's really interesting that Dressed to Kill opens very similarly to Carrie and also ends very similarly to Carrie.
It sure does. He learned a valuable lesson in Carrie, which is got to end with a shock. So
and open with a lot of nudity.
And open with a shower, which more movies should. Let's be honest.
We're kind of prudes these days. So you realize in 40 years, all we've really done is become a bunch of prudes.
My first De Palma was probably Carrie. But my first De Palma with, like, an awareness of, okay, this is a Brian De Palma movie, was Body Double, which has so many horror connections because you have Greg Henry from Slither, you have Barbara Crampton in a cameo at the beginning, and most importantly, you have Craig Wasson's penis from Ghost Story and A Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
Yes. No penis in Nightmare 3, though, in case anybody's listening and they're like,
well,
wait, when
there.
did we see
It's
Craig?
just, it's not visible, but it is there.
Yeah, it's there. I don't imagine
it's an uncredited appearance.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it was like the song where he had the detachable penis. Do you remember that song? What a time.
I do remember Detachable Penis.
Yeah, that was the rage in, like, 92?
I feel like that was a Beavis and Butthead hit. Like,
yeah, it was 92.
That was one that they watched.
Yeah, King Missile, by the way.
King Missile, detachable penis.
Yes. I also like the big controversy of green Jello having to change to green jelly for the Three Pigs song in 92. We're off to a really, really good focused start on Dressed to Kill, by the way.
Green jelly still plays because I have a neighbor who plays drums and he, like, sits in with them when they come to town and he plays drums for them.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Good on them.
I don't remember anything about them except that they had, like, a Flintstones video.
Yeah. Oh boy. Wow,
was it Flintstones? I don't know. And to me, they were always just like bad guar.
I don't know. I really liked the Three Little Pigs video because it was like
it wasn't Flintstones. It was Three Little Pigs. I don't know why I thought it was Flintstones.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that would be Three Little Pigs.
Yes.
But I really liked that video because it was like claymation-y and stuff like that. So, yeah. Wow. Everybody listening right now is like, what are they talking about?
I tuned in to listen to a discussion of Dressed to Kill. All I'm hearing about is green jelly and Craig Wasson's penis.
Yeah. Definitely giving him the good content to start off.
This is precisely why people tune into Horror BFFs.
Yes. I mean, I personally listen to podcasts with the hopes of hearing about Craig Wasson's penis myself.
I listen to a podcast hosted by Craig Wasson's penis.
Wow. Now you're just trying to be cool.
It's called What's Hanging with Craig Wasson's penis.
Oh,
He records it in his garage.
You gotta make sure you have good acoustics for it. So I get it. I would listen to that podcast. That was actually my first cinematic penis. So I guess, full circle. Yeah.
I don't remember my first cinematic penis. My first CP, if you will.
Yeah. I think my first nudity was DC Cab.
R.I.P. Joel Schumacher.
Yeah. It was, it was like sort of the first. I mean, like I'd seen it probably because, like, I saw American Werewolf in theaters and stuff like that. But I think the first nudity I really remembered was DC Cab because we rented it because of Mr. T.
Well, of course.
And we were like in like the summer between kindergarten and first grade. And that was quite an awakening because you're just like, oh, it's a comedy and Hulk Hogan's in there too. Okay. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, whoa, this is filthy.
I've never seen DC Cab, but now I want to.
But it was funny because it wasn't like my babysitter turned it off. So, anything to keep the kids entertained, I guess, back then.
My first nudity that I was aware of was Revenge of the Nerds.
Okay.
Do you know what I just found out about today? If we could briefly pivot away from Dress to Kill, because then we'll get right back to it the way we have been talking about it.
I was going to say, we've been so in-depth in the last 5 minutes, yes.
Jill Schoelen is in DC Cab? Holy shit, I'm renting this right now.
Yeah, I'm really surprised you hadn't seen it.
I'm sorry, but this is happening.
Okay, should we just cancel the episode and go watch DC Cab?
Why are we going to talk about? I'm annoyed that now we have to talk about one of my favorite movies from one of my favorite directors because I'd much rather be watching DC Cab. R.I.P. Joel Schumacher.
Yes, I am working on I'm probably one of the very few people that will defend it, but I am for my Phantom Thread series. I had to put it on hold because of Class of '80 for the minute, but in next week or two, I will be running my deep appreciation piece on his Phantom of the Opera.
Yes, which I believe we talked about during our Wolfman show.
Yes, we did. And now, speaking of Wolfman, did you hear who's directing the new Wolfman?
I did, and I'm excited because Lee Winnell is great, but it shows a real lack of imagination.
I'm super excited because I love Lee and I will watch anything and everything he does, but I kind of wanted somebody else to get a shot, to be really honest.
It's
but
like
I'm cool
the most obvious choice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm good with it. I know the movie's going to be great.
Absolutely.
But like, I was kind of hoping to see the talent pool open up a little bit.
Yes.
Lee could go on to like an Invisible Man sequel or something. That's cool.
No, something else.
Well, I mean,
we don't need a sequel to Invisible Man.
Oh, I want to see her being like a total badass and like fighting bad guys and shit. Like turn it on its head. Yeah. Give me like give me a Texas Chainsaw 2.
Like an Invisible Agent remake, but with Elizabeth Moss.
Yeah, or Invisible Woman.
Sure.
Except that I think we had that discussion on that episode that Invisible Woman is actually being remade by what's her face? Oh goodness, Pitch Perfect.
Elizabeth Banks.
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
So I'm excited, but I feel like I feel like getting to see Elizabeth Moss like smile and have some fun and like really let her hair down would be kind of cool and different.
Yeah.
So we've tortured that poor woman so much and for our entertainment for so many years. Let's let her hair down a little bit. So, but anyway, Wolfman's going to be fun. But I'm hoping maybe once we get to Bride, we'll get somebody else in the mix a little bit. But we still have Karen Kusama doing Dracula. So I'm really
that's
stoked
very cool.
For that. So.
Yeah. And I, obviously I'm very excited about a Lee Winnell directed Wolfman. I just wish they had, like you said, thought outside the box just a little bit.
Yes.
But I want to talk about this for 1 second because I didn't know about this. And talking about DC Cab and Hulk Hogan made me think of it because I just found out about this today, and it has nothing to do with Dress to Kill. Or,
is it that Hulk Hogan's a racist?
Or Class of... I just found this out. Can you believe this? In like 1990, there was a pilot called Tag Team starring Jesse Ventura and Roddy Piper. And they play wrestlers who get bounced out of wrestling because they refuse to like take a dive in a fight, which is how wrestling works. And so they become buddy cops. And like the fact that this didn't go to series and run for 7 years is really upsetting me today.
It really should. Also, just for your own awareness, the pilot episode is on YouTube.
I will be watching that right after DC Cab.
DC Cab. So now we've got your night of entertainment set.
Absolutely.
I actually found out about it because I want to say he actually talked about that. Roddy Piper talked about it at Flashback Weekend years and years and years ago. But to be very honest, I hadn't even thought about it until you just mentioned it again.
It sounds like the greatest thing ever.
Like, I would have completely been on board with that.
Yes.
What is wrong with our entertainment industry?
We needed more Roddy Piper on TV. I'll take Jesse Ventura too.
I guess if we have to, sure.
Yeah, it's fine. But Roddy Piper on like a regular series? Come on.
Yeah, I do not blame you. But yeah, that's definitely something if you're into Roddy Piper's film work, which is, not exactly extensive, so you're probably jonesing for a little bit more after you've gone through like just a handful of films that he was in. Yeah. Head over to YouTube. I don't like to generally recommend, YouTube for some reason, because some people get a little weird about the rights and stuff, but that's a TV show that's went nowhere, and who the hell even owns those rights anymore? So go for it. Have at it.
Yes, I'm going to.
All right. You're going to have to report back as soon as you watch it, too.
All right.
I think I'm going to have to make a point of it to watch it this weekend now, too. Maybe that's what the next episode of Horror BFFs is.
We're going to talk about tag team.
Boom, back again. Right.
Wow.
I know you got that reference, right?
Wow. Yes, I did. These shows are just us dating ourselves, I think.
I know.
It's just
like the kids at
home
are
old
like...
people talking about old pop culture.
Yeah. Enjoy, kids. Enjoy. This is what you get to look forward to in like 20 years.
Hopefully there are no listeners to Horror BFFs under the age of 40, because they're just going to be completely lost. Yeah.
Googling everything. It's okay.
Speaking of Googling everything, Dressed to Kill opens with Angie Dickinson in the shower.
It does.
And
it very much does.
It's quite a scene. I made a case a couple of years ago, and I will make this case again because I was reminded of it while I was rewatching Dressed to Kill, which I would say is probably top 5 Brian De Palma for me. Dressed to Kill is sort of the best example we have of an American giallo. Because it has all of the tropes of the giallo, the sort of psychosexual motives of the killer, the amateur detectives who are sort of pulled into a mystery, being Nancy Allen and Keith Gordon, the elaborate, involved set pieces. The killer even uses a straight razor. I don't know. What do you think of this theory?
I completely agree.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Case closed. Episode done. It's really interesting to sort of, because I watched this movie when I was 10, which is, again, I would not recommend showing a 10-year-old Dressed to Kill in general, because I don't know how I got away with renting this movie, because it's even like a really sexy art, like on the box and stuff. So I don't know how I pulled that one off, but I was like, hey, I want to rent this movie because Terror in the Aisles, talked about it. So I'm going to watch it. And obviously there are things that I knew, I guess when I was a kid, to me, this was like a naughty movie more than it was like a straightforward horror movie. There were definitely parts that kind of freaked me out, but it just felt really naughty when I was watching it. And obviously now as an adult going back and rewatching it, it's a really interesting experience, because there's parts of it where I'm like, wow, this is, extremely, for the time progressive in terms of the stories that were being told in American cinema. But yet now sort of looking at the lens of what we know. And I'm so glad we are 2 straight people talking about this movie, because I feel like, this is so appropriate. But talking, in terms of dealing with transgender issues, it's, for 1980, putting that out in a widely released American film, nobody was really doing that. But yet now, kind of looking at it now, knowing what we collectively know as a society and, what I've tried to do in terms of informing myself of different issues that I, 5 years ago, I didn't really understand, but, have worked really hard to try to understand. There's definitely aspects to this movie that are kind of problematic. And by I would say extremely problematic.
Well, because unfortunately, Hollywood has a long history of portraying LGBTQ people
as mentally ill,
and oftentimes as killers, as psychos. And so it was certainly an example of Brian De Palma trying to build upon, as you mentioned earlier, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho in terms of the character's psychology and motivations. And in 1980, I suspect people didn't really bat an eye at having this trans person being a psychopath and a killer. But now, after so many examples of this on screen, it's just like, oh, Jesus, this again. So I understand why that's incredibly frustrating for that audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's one of the most interesting moments, I think, in the film comes towards the end when Liz and Peter are sitting at the restaurant and they're talking about this, kind of what the gender reassignment surgery and what it undertakes, because, 1980, I don't think a lot of people really understood it. And I think there's still people today that don't understand it.
For sure.
Which is a shame because,
those people are named J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, unfortunately. Actually, I don't even give a shit because I never read any of the Harry Potter books. And I actually only ever saw 2 of the movies. So, I'm fine with moving away from that batshit crazy lady. But there's a woman who's sitting behind Peter the whole time as they're discussing. And she's kind of like one of my favorite supporting characters in this entire movie, because just her face during that, it's really interesting how reflective she is of American society.
Yeah.
And sort of only briefly sort of overhearing things and not really having an understanding of them. And I think for me that she's sort of this really pivotal piece as to what Dressed to Kill is that there's just such a gross misunderstanding of, these kind of issues that most people unfortunately just sort of recoil in horror when they're exposed to them. And that's really on them to sort of educate themselves and better themselves for it.
And it's no mistake that her reaction is so prominent, because De Palma shoots the whole thing in one of his sort of textbook split diopter shots where both Nancy Allen is in focus in the foreground, but then this woman is the other most prominent thing in the frame, totally in focus, reacting to everything that Nancy Allen is saying. And it goes on for a long time. I mean, he really allows her reactions to be such a major part of that entire sequence. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree there. And I also think what's so, it's funny because, a lot of people talk about De Palma and all his, split diopter shots and things like that. This movie, I guess I didn't remember that, boy, he really earns all his pennies on those here, especially. Obviously there's stuff in Carrie and Phantom and in other films as well, but, there was a lot going on, a lot with that in this film, which I thought was really interesting. But it also, what I liked about it was that I like busy movies, if that makes sense. I'm okay with a movie who wants to take its time and it gives you the 2 characters and that's what you're really focusing on. But I think for a movie when observation is such a crucial theme, that I really think that it lends itself well to this story in particular, because you have Michael Caine, who maybe if you don't know it at the beginning, is obviously this person who's killing people. And he is an observer. So it really, and he's sort of the central figure to this. And then, through all these other sort of chance meetings, and Nancy Allen becomes an observer. Keith Gordon becomes an observer. Dennis Franz is just a madman who's breaking every police rule. But I love him for that. But it's really interesting because, there's some movies where I'll watch and I'll see that and I'll be like, oh, okay. But I actually think it works really, really well here, because there's so much more going on in a lot of these instances than just that primary focus that most directors would just sort of zone you into as a viewer. Hopefully that makes any kind of sense.
Well, this is, that theme of observing, or I'll take it a step further and say voyeurism. It's something that's prominent in a lot of De Palma's.
That's such a better word. This is why you get paid the big bucks for podcasts.
Well, it's such a prominent theme in so many of his movies, and Dressed to Kill is sort of, in a lot of ways, one of his most personal movies, because I want to say this is in the documentary De Palma, which if you've never seen, I highly, highly recommend if you're at all interested in him as a director. It's literally just clips of his movies and then a talking head of him talking about making these movies. And every time I watch it, I just want to go back and rewatch pretty much every Brian De Palma movie. He talks about, I think it's in this documentary. I don't remember if it is, so if I'm misspeaking, I apologize. But when he was a kid, his father was cheating on his mom, and he took it upon himself to act as sort of a private detective and go out and spy on his dad and take pictures and stuff. And that story informs so much of Brian De Palma's work, because essentially in the Keith Gordon character, he's casting himself as this kid who is trying to do right by his mom, who in this case has been murdered instead of cheated upon. But Keith Gordon is basically a stand-in for Brian De Palma in this movie, who becomes this amateur detective to try to right the wrong that has been done to his mother. And this theme of voyeurism, every character becoming a voyeur is something that just is so informed by De Palma's own childhood, right? That he's spying on his dad in these sexual situations to try to bring back some intel for his mom. And every character in this movie is a voyeur, none more so than De Palma's own camera, which, again, we talked about the opening of the movie, which starts with us spying on Angie Dickinson in the shower,
Right.
And this idea of sex as both this desire of hers, but then it turns into this violation, the correlation between sex and violence that runs through the entire film, all the way through the end with kind of dream sequence with Nancy Allen, where we have sexuality once again combined with this act of violence. This to me is like the Brian De Palma's origin story, Dressed to Kill, because he has all these great movies. He makes these kind of weird radical comedies in the 60s, and then in the 70s he makes these weird movies like Phantom of the Paradise and home movies. And then he makes The Fury, which I love The Fury, and he makes Obsession, which is sort of him starting to work out some stuff. But Dressed to Kill is where he comes fully formed. Like, this is what I think of when I think of a Brian De Palma movie. It's incredibly directed. It's about voyeurism and sex and violence, and it's a thriller, and it's all of the things that he's doing in this movie. And he only makes, 4 or 5 of these kinds of movies, but this is exactly what I think of when I think of a Brian De Palma movie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just wanted to mention for anybody who's listening, the Brian De Palma documentary, I think, is currently streaming on both Canopy and Netflix.
Ooh, it was on Amazon Prime.
Okay, was it on Amazon Prime
You
too?
talk. I'll look it up.
Okay. But yeah, because last month I did a rundown of like genre documentaries of people.
It is on Netflix.
Okay, cool. So I never know if things get pulled, because like we did our episode on Altered States, it was like, yeah, it's streaming on Vudu, and then literally 2 days later it came off of Vudu, so I felt bad. And
it's available for rental on Amazon Prime, but it is not streaming on Amazon Prime, so Netflix is the place to go.
Okay, or Canopy, if you have it sounds weird, but if you have a library card, Canopy is like the best.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you can have access to pretty much everything and anything you could think of for free.
Yeah.
So educate yourself, people. It's pretty good. I've actually been enjoying it. I actually just got my first library card this year for the first time in like 15 years, because I was like, well, this is where we're heading, so let's make the most of it. But yeah, it's interesting when you were talking about sort of like what I would say is like sort of those calling card movies for Brian De Palma. I would definitely put this as number one. I mean, I part of me, like the fan in me, wants to say like, something like Phantom of the Paradise or Carrie. But I think in terms of like his storytelling sense, this to me just feels way more like him.
Yeah.
Because obviously Carrie is him sort of distilling Stephen King through his style.
Right.
You know, Phantom of the Paradise is like him sort of doing Phantom of the Opera through his sort of strange storytelling tendencies and stuff like that. So this to me does feel like pure, unfiltered, you know, straight into your veins De Palma.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's interesting because, you know, at this point in his career, like, again, this is kind of a ballsy film, you know, for somebody to be making. And it was, if I'm not mistaken, this was an independent project. So, you know, to have the budget that did and have people like having Michael Caine in it is really interesting to me, because I know he's sort of a prestige player now, but his name still had a bit of a weight to it, like back then. So it's kind of interesting to me, you know, that he would do this. But I think for me, you know, if I was going to tell people, like, you know, watch these 3 movies to get an understanding of who De Palma is collectively as a director, this would definitely go on that list. It's funny because, like, as soon as I finished this, because I haven't watched Blowout in like maybe 20 years, and I was like, I want to go watch Blowout now, because that could also change like once I watch Blowout, because it's been a really long time since I've seen that, because I'm a terrible person. But
Blowout, I still think is his best movie. Like, Phantom is my favorite. Blowout is his best. Dressed to Kill is like
quintessential.
Yeah, like the Dressed to Kill and Body Double are like the 2 that I would point to and say, like, if you want to understand Brian De Palma as a filmmaker, those are the 2 movies to watch.
Yeah, I also haven't seen Body Double since I was a kid, so.
You know, it stars Craig Wasson's penis, right?
Well, I mean, okay, there you go. I'm in. Now I'm going to have to go find that. So I'm going to go on a little search for Craig Wasson's penis and Body Double, and we'll be all good.
Also, make sure that you listen to my podcast.
Yes, definitely. What I loved about this also, too, is here's the thing. Like, I know as genre fans, we love anybody who's in genre movies. Like, we will celebrate everybody. Like, you know, we're very appreciative of anybody who sort of traipses through our like little carnival of cinema, you know. But I feel like Keith Gordon is one of those actors who we all knew was great, but I don't feel like we ever really appreciated like what he was bringing to the table, like during the 80s. Because like I think about, like, you know, he's even even Jaws 2, I think, like, you know, he doesn't have quite as prime of a role, but he's still, you know, a big part of that movie. And then I think about like him in like Dressed to Kill, because like if you're like me and you watch Tyranny Isles and you've never seen Dressed to Kill, you're just assuming the most of the movie is about Angie Dickinson and Nancy Allen, because that's pretty much the only focus that they give that movie is basically, you know, Angie Dickinson in the shower, her getting killed, Nancy Allen trying to seduce Michael Caine. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very centered on the female elements of the film. But he's really freaking good in this movie. Yeah. Like, as this kid who's, you know, who's very proactive. And I really, really enjoy his work in this. And I still think Christine is, you know, his work in Christine is probably one of the most underappreciated performances of horror throughout the 1980s. Like, you know, he's good, but he's like, there's just something really compelling and really heartbreaking about his transformation in that movie that I still just, like, it makes my heart hurt when I think about how good he is in that movie.
I think in Christine, I think part of what is, it's not holding him back because he's terrific, but I think the supporting cast isn't up to his game in Christine.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think Alexandra Paul is lovely. I think she's a wonderful person, but I don't know that she was the right person for that role.
Right. And I like John Stockwell, but he's just kind of like generic guy. And fake Travolta is no substitute for Travolta.
So Buddy Repperton, who looks like he's like 45 when he's in high school. Right. It's that's definitely what I would call like a singular performance film. Where you're really showing up for for Keith Gordon. I mean, although I think his parents are pretty good in it too. For as minimal time that they get on screen, I do think what's her face, who ended up being, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's Christina Belfort, who ended up playing Steve Sanders' mom.
Oh, okay.
90210.
Yeah.
She was Samantha Sanders, TV.
More dated references.
I know. Here you go, kids. 90210 now streaming on Hulu. But
did you watch that weird comeback that they did?
I didn't. I
didn't
not
either. But
I didn't watch the Melrose Place one either. I'm actually still going through the original run of Melrose Place again.
Melrose Place was like a remake, though, right? Like they just
no.
Oh, it wasn't.
No,
it was the OG cast and everything.
No, it wasn't the OG cast. So what it was is that it actually sort of continued elements of the stories from the original Melrose Place. So I guess I didn't see any of it, but I was reading about it because I was like, because I read how Laura Leighton, who played Sydney Andrews in the original run of it, it ends with like her the original series her character supposedly dies. Well, it turns out like she didn't, but then like it opens with a murder mystery about Sydney in the new Melrose Place.
I'm very confused.
Which is crazy. And they did bring some of the original cast back, like Thomas Calabro came back for a little bit. I know Josie Bassett came back for a little bit. I think even Heather Locklear came back for like 2 episodes. And I think it ran for like 2 seasons. But I going into it, I had no idea that it sort of involved anything from the original cast. I was just assuming it was kind of like 90210. But I guess even the 90210 reboot also involved original cast members, because I know Tori Spelling was on it for a bit and Jenny Garth was as well.
Well, there were like 2 90210 reboots, right? Because there was one with like a young cast.
Oh, but then they did the 90210 sort of
the weird like, meta thing with all the original cast playing themselves, which is all
still on my DVR, and I haven't watched it because I was kind of afraid to. I think because it started airing right when Luke Perry died. Right. And I think it was just kind of hard for me to do that. So,
and he was the only one who wasn't on it, right?
He was not.
Okay.
So I think even Shannon Doherty came back, even though she's been really sick.
Yeah.
So I'm sure everybody at home's like, why are they just go back to talking about Dress to Kill, guys?
To Kill.
Segue.
That sequence in the museum is so great, and every time I rewatch it, I forget that he kind of plays fair, because when we're outside the car, we scan past Michael Caine real quick.
We sure do.
And then I mean, it gets even more obvious because then it shows him picking up the glove, or her, I should say, picking up the glove, because at that point she's Bobby. And so it gets even more obvious. But when we scan past Bobby really quickly, I'm always like, oh, my God, De Palma, you're a genius. I love this movie. I don't know if I've made that obvious.
Oh, I think you have, which is good. This is why we're doing this.
I know it's problematic. I love it.
No, I what I think is really interesting. So there's this scene where Dr. Elliot goes to visit Dr. Levy about Bobby. And to me, the scene doesn't really click with me, only because to myself, it seems like if you're a mental health advocate, as Dr. Levy is, we're led to believe that Dr. Levy is.
And Dr. Levy is the mayor from Ghostbusters.
Exactly. Yeah. Lenny. Gotta love Lenny. And mayor from Ghostbusters, too, because he was doing it right. He listened to the Ghostbusters. He's a good mayor.
Saved the lives of millions of registered voters.
Exactly. That's all you got to do. So it's interesting to me that, like, so in that moment where Dr. Elliot shows up, and I mean, it's pretty obvious when you look at Bobby and you look at Dr. Elliot, the facial structure is the same, right? Mm-hmm. So are we suspending our disbelief that Dr. Levy in that moment doesn't realize that Dr. Elliot is Bobby? And if he does recognize that, how does that not raise any sort of red flags? I know he goes to the police, but like, as somebody who would be their mental health advocate, how does that not like, it just seems like he could have done more in that moment. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
You know, where he was like, maybe we need to go into a specialized place to talk about this. And, maybe, we need to take a moment to really address what's going on here, because you're coming to me about this patient and turns out you are this patient. You know what I mean? Like, it seems it's a very interesting moment for me, because as a kid, it's just like, oh, you know, whatever. And as an adult now, kind of like, oh, why would you do that? It's an interesting little conundrum of a scene for me.
I don't think I realized either that, you know, the movie tries to throw you off the scent a little by not really showing. We don't ever get a really good look at Bobby. Bobby tends to be out of focus. You know, in the elevator murder, we get the razor blade is in focus, but Bobby's a little bit out of focus, you know, with the wig and the sunglasses and everything. The voice of Bobby on those phone calls is William Finley, which I didn't realize.
Yes.
The Phantom of the Paradise, and he shows up in a handful of Brian De Palma movies, and I love that that he continued to give him work, because William Finley also shows up in a handful of Tobe Hooper movies. All of my favorites have worked with William Finley.
Well, that's all you need. You just need the William Finley touch. But yeah, it's just one of those moments where, like, now looking at it, I'm just like, huh. Like, if they were trying to do this movie now, I think, like, that's not a scene you would include, because obviously at that moment, the psychiatrist would have to be far more proactive than just telling the cop, like, hey, by the way, I'm pretty sure my client's the murderer and he doesn't know it.
Right.
You know, but I do love how fast and loose Dennis Franz plays. And it, by the way, love, like, his triple gold chains with the little horn, like, and his just bushy little chest hair coming out.
If you look up Chicago accent in the dictionary, it's just a picture of Dennis Franz and a hot dog.
It should be. I mean, although I think you could also probably throw in anybody from, like, the Da Bears skits from over the years from SNL as well. Sure. As, like, secondary.
Dennis Franz is what happens when you make a wish on a Chicago hot dog and it comes to life.
That should be like a T-shirt.
It's just relish and a mustache.
I love it. Is it bad to say that I don't like relish on my hot dogs?
I don't either.
Chicagoan? Okay, good. So, but now I not only do I want to go rewatch DC Cab and go watch Tag Team, but now I want to go to Portillo's and go get a hot dog. So
yes,
this is giving me all sorts of feelings today.
This is a great podcast.
Yes, this is why everybody tunes in. But yeah, I'm curious, because I was doing some reading and stuff, because, you know, I was trying to prepare for this and be professional. Have they ever released the more, I guess, the X-rated version of this movie?
Yeah, they have.
Okay.
And it's not the old MGM DVD had a side-by-side comparison of the uncut footage, and it's not that much different by today's standards, especially. So I've seen what is, you know, the X-rated or the unrated footage, and it's really not that different.
Okay, because from what I read, it's like, I know, like, there's a little more nudity, a little more blood, and the scene when Liz is trying to seduce Dr. Elliot is a little more raunchy. Which, can we talk about that? Because, like, I adore Nancy Allen, and I think she's just, like, the sweetest, purest, you know, woman. And, like, to hear her saying these things in this movie made me really uncomfortable. Like, again, as a kid, I was just like, whatever. But, like, now as an adult, I was like, oh, goodness gracious. Like, what is happening here? And she's getting undressed, and she shows up with no pants on, which is how I also show up to all of my doctor's appointments. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Pants are optional at this point. But that scene in particular, I'm just like, again, I you know, as a kid, I saw bits of it, like, in Turn the Aisles, and then, you know, you watch it and you're just like, okay, whatever. There's a little bit of nipple. But, like, as an adult, I'm like, boy, she's so sweet. And, like, I mean, I know she was, you know, a bitch and Carrie and stuff like that, but, like, I don't know. It made me blush as an adult. If I turn into a prude, I don't know.
Well, it's funny. My introduction to Nancy Allen was probably Terror in the Aisles, but I didn't put together, like, who she was. It was just, so she's that lady sitting in the seats. But it was more so like RoboCop. That was where I was aware of, like, okay, that's who Nancy Allen is. And then as I got a little bit older, I was like realizing that she has this whole body of amazing work from the 70s and early 80s, from like I Want to Hold Your Hand in 1941 through the Brian De Palma stuff, because the 1-2 punch of Dress to Kill and Blowout, both of which, you know, unfortunately she's playing a prostitute, but she's so good in both of them, particularly in Blowout. I mean, she's great here, but Blowout gives her a little bit more to do. She's just the greatest. And something like RoboCop, and I like her in RoboCop, but I realize now that, like, RoboCop does not tell us who Nancy Allen is as an actor.
No. Yeah, and actually, I will say, to the commendation of, you know, of De Palma,
who was married to her at this time.
Yes. Oh yeah, I didn't even realize that it was during this. I thought it was a little bit later. That makes sense. What I actually really like the character of Liz, because I think especially sort of prostitute characters in the 80s were almost sort of toss-away characters a lot of the time.
Oh, sure. They were extras in the police station.
Yeah, or they just, you know, they were just there to be killed by somebody, or they were just there to titillate, or add, you know, a sort of an essence of quote-unquote sleaze, especially if you're making a movie about New York in the 1980s. But what I really, really like about Liz is like that she's very fully realized here. Like, she knows what she does for a living. She's sort of reconciled that with who she is as a human being. But she also has like goals and ambition too, which is really interesting. And I don't think, you know, especially with this movie in particular, like that that character kind of gets enough credit for that. Because again, when you look at this compared to where we were seeing other sort of characters, especially like something like in Maniac, you know, she's kind of a standout, you know, she's a standout prostitute, if you will, for 1980s cinema. But again, it was just kind of nice because, you know, it's one of those where like once you start watching horror movies, you sort of see these things like these patterns, you know, develop. It's always nice when you can kind of go back and revisit one and realize, hey, somebody out there was actually breaking the mold with it.
Right.
And I just like the fact that it wasn't, you know, there was more to her. And I think it was very sympathetic to making somebody who does sex work for a living something more than a punchline, something more than fodder for violence or anything like that. And, you know, is problematic as elements are of this film, I think that's probably one of the best aspects of this film in terms of its characterization.
Yeah, it's kind of progressive in that way because it doesn't, her station in life or her occupation doesn't define who she is. It explains why she is where she is when the murder takes place. It, I guess, makes her a little bit more free with her sexuality or comfortable with her sexuality in the scene where she's attempting to seduce Michael Caine. But other than that, you know, the fact that she's a prostitute doesn't really inform her. Beyond that, it doesn't really inform her character. She's, like you said, a fully realized person far beyond, you know, her chosen occupation.
Yeah, and I think also it's really reflected, too, in the relationship that she has with Peter, which is really, I think a really sweet part of this.
I love the two of them. I would watch them just, like, do a whole series of adventures.
Right? Because, like, there's something really pure about their connection. Like, it's, you know, again, it's one of those things where, like, you know, in a horror movie where a young teenage kid befriends a prostitute, like we kind of expect where we know that's going to go. That this movie doesn't go there. Right. In a movie where it's, you know, very sexy and very sexualized, that's like the least sexualized aspect of this entire thing. Yeah. And I really like that. Like, I just like that they're friends with each other. Like, they've come together through this like really horrible situation. And just basically connected as human beings. Like, it wasn't like she had to take him home and have sex with him. Right. Like, they just hang out. Like, even in the scene when she dreams and she wakes up and he comes into her room, like, you would almost expect him to be, like, laying in the bed next to her, right? And her being, like, unclothed or something because to insinuate that there's been some sort of, physical intimacy between them. But that's not even the case at all. And I was like, wow, this is really kind of lovely. And I think it's a really, really sweet. And again, I don't know why we didn't get like 10 Nancy Allen and Keith Gordon movies in the 80s. We should get a time machine now. Let's do this.
Let's go greenlight those, because I would watch them solve a series of murders. Perhaps they could be former professional wrestlers who are bounced because they won't take a dive.
And here's this. And then they get hired by Dennis Franz as sort of like these fringe people. So they're not officially working for the police, but they're working with the police. And every once in a while, he has to pop in and tell him, you're not playing by the rules. He's
You're
like,
not
but
playing
I can't.
by the rules.
Yes, but, if you want to go break those rules, that's okay, too.
And then at night, he has to go back to being a hot dog.
I swear to God, I just want somebody to draw Dennis Farina as a hot dog now.
Dennis Franz. Dennis Farina can also be a hot dog, but Dennis Franz.
Could. Oh, God, wow.
Somebody wished on a hot dog, and it became Dennis Franz.
It's like a really messed up Disney movie.
Yes.
The Princess and the Hot Dog.
Hey, kid, I'm your fairy godfather.
Holy crap. Okay, so somebody out there, please draw me Dennis Franz as a hot dog. I have no artistic skills whatsoever. I could try. It's not going to work. For the love of God, please. I just want this. If I could get a tattoo, I would get this as a tattoo. That's how serious I am.
Let's talk about that dream sequence at the end, because it's a cheat, and it's him just trying to replicate what he had done with Carrie, which is like, well, we got to have one more big scare at the end. Because otherwise, it really does kind of follow the model of Psycho, which is we have the big reveal, and then we have a long sort of semi-clinical explanation of what was going on. And in Psycho, it's coming from the doctor. Here, it's coming from the two of them in a diner, and so it's far less medical, because it's sort of the layman's approach to trying to explain what was happening. And
although we do get some with Dr. Levy in the police station too.
Yeah, there's still definitely some of the doctor stuff. And then if it was Psycho, the movie would be over. But De Palma takes it a step further, and we get this extended sequence of Nancy Allen in the shower. And what I love about it is that she becomes aware that she's being watched. She's not Angie Dickinson, where she's sort of taken by surprise. Nancy Allen, once again, is proactive and is aware that there's someone out there. And that makes it all the more scarier, because she's so vulnerable, and she's so, literally exposed, and trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to get out of this without any resources available? And then he pulls the twist of the shoes being empty, which is so, so great. And then, the jump cut to her getting her throat slashed, and all of it is bullshit. It's all just a dream. It's all just a way to do one more cool set piece, which, that's what this movie is. It's just a series of amazing set pieces. Aside from it being a really great set piece, is the movie any worse off without it?
Yeah, it's interesting, because like rewatching it last night, I was like, boy, this movie has a lot of endings.
Yes, it does.
I was like, we complain a lot about like endings, movies having multiple endings these days. I think because it's so effective, it doesn't really bother me.
Okay.
Because there's a really good amount of tension that happens in that, and there's a lot of like horrible, terrible feelings, like especially when they cut to Michael Caine in the hospital or wherever, where he basically attacks the nurse, as like hundreds of men are watching on. And I mean, if there's ever a statement about how society views women, I mean, just take a picture of that shot of all those men like looking down as he's violating that nurse, and her sort of sense of worth. Like, wow, that was oddly prescient 40 years later. So I think for me, it doesn't really bother me as much as maybe it should, because it's so good, because you're just literally, like clinging to every little second of that, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And it worked well. Like, I almost think it's almost might be a more effective dream sequence than maybe in a Carrie. I mean, Carrie, I think, works so well because nobody saw it coming in 76.
Right. And it's so fast. It happens so quickly.
It's almost like him saying, you know, I did this really cool thing that sort of became a standard for a lot of horror stories,
Right.
where you have to have that like final punch. But he's like, but how can I extend it and really finesse it and do something even bigger with it? And I think for me, that's what this is, almost like his own reaction to what he was able to do in Carrie, and doing it a little bigger, a lot longer, a lot more drawn out, tensions really flaring throughout the whole thing. And I really like it. Like again, I know it's one of those things where it's like, you know, okay, now we're in the police station. Oh, the movie's over. Nope. Now we're going to go to we're going to go to the restaurant. Okay. But all right. And then all of a sudden now we're watching Michael Caine in a hospital and he's killing a nurse. Everyone's watching. And now all of a sudden, you know, Nancy Allen's back in the shower. You know, and it's one of those things where, you know, as much as like Hitchcock was trying to tell us how vulnerable we were back, you know, in 1960 with, you know, with Janet Leigh and her shower scene, it's very interesting how crucial shower scenes were to Dress to Kill. So in that respect, we didn't really kind of broaden anything. But yeah, I think it still works really well. I enjoy it. I may feel differently about movies that do it now. So maybe that's just me funneling it through my nostalgia filters a little bit. But if somebody came to me and said, oh, you know, we don't need it. Like, I don't know that I would disagree with them, but I still enjoy it. And I still think it's a really fantastic set piece from De Palma.
And I have to say, I'm actually glad that it's a dream, because I think I would be bummed if this movie ended with Nancy Allen being murdered.
I would too. I feel like just because of everything that she kind of went through, and like was how, you know, she was basically putting herself on the line when she didn't really have to.
Right.
Like, other than the fact that for her own survival, like, she could have just got on a plane and left town, you know?
Yeah.
And basically left, you know, Keith Gordon out here to fend for himself. And I don't think anybody would have thought any less of her. But she firmly puts herself in harm's way in order to basically stop these murders. So for her to sort of lose that battle in the end, I think would have been a super bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love, you know, Brian De Palma takes a lot of shit because he seems so obsessed with Hitchcock, and his films are so Hitchcockian, and he makes Obsession, and it's essentially him reworking Vertigo, and he makes Body Double, and it's essentially him reworking Rear Window with definite shades of Vertigo in that movie as well. Because Craig Wasson's penis is afflicted with claustrophobia as opposed to vertigo. And Dress to Kill is obviously his riff on Psycho, with, you know, the sort of directorial flourishes amped up to 11, with the sex and violence amped up to 11. I love it. I've never had a problem with it. You know, he gets so easily dismissed as sort of this Hitchcock imitator, but I think he's so thoroughly his own thing that it doesn't bother me that he's kind of riffing on these classics. I don't know how you feel about it.
I'm okay with it. I mean, because frankly, like, you know, we're always going to see remakes, or we're always going to see new interpretations. And I think he does enough differently. Like, I think he brings a different sort of aesthetic, a different sense of style.
Yeah.
To these types of films where, you know, sure, but like, everybody's riffing on everybody these days. You know what I mean? Like, there's only, you know, I think there's like the saying that like there's only like 7 basic ideas for story, right? So how do you make it different? And, you know, I mean, I would much rather watch Dress to Kill and call it a Psycho remake than I would want to watch Psycho 98. So, although apparently that movie's kind of becoming en vogue these days too, which I'm not quite sure about. I guess, I don't know, maybe I should go back and rewatch it, but I don't think so.
No, I think people are just finally catching up to the idea of it as this cinematic experiment. I don't think anybody's saying like, oh, it's actually good. But
I've seen a few people say it's good though.
Oh boy. See, I mean, I could see people saying
opinions
like,
on a movie either, but
sure.
I don't see it.
I could see people saying like, oh, that's so interesting, because I've always felt that way from the day I saw it in 1998. I find it a fascinating movie. I don't, you know, would I watch it over the original? No, but I think there's a lot of stuff to like in that movie.
Yeah, I guess maybe because at the time when De Palma was doing it, we weren't seeing it as much. Like if there was a filmmaker right now who was kind of riffing on Hitchcock all the time, like we probably would be lauding them.
Right,
we've seen plenty of directors who've gone out and they've done their spin on classic Carpenter's, films. And most of those have gotten sort of critical praise. I mean, Ari Aster, between his two films, he's riffed on a lot of movies that we've all grown up with and loved, and doesn't nearly get the kind of flack for that. And that's not to say that I don't think that his films are original, because I do, but there are also some very familiar elements to those movies as well from stuff that we've seen before. So yeah, I don't know. I think people need to relax a little bit. You know what I mean? Just chill out, everybody. It was
a polarizing. I mean, just looking at the Wikipedia page, it was such a polarizing movie, even in 1980. And I know De Palma has always been a polarizing filmmaker. But in 1980, it's, on the one hand, it's being nominated for Best Film of the Year by the New York Film Critics Circle, while at the same time being nominated for a bunch of Razzies or, golden raspberries, as they were called at the time, in every major category. Worst actress, for both Nancy Allen. Oh, no, just Nancy Allen was nominated for Worst Actress. Michael Caine nominated for Worst Actor, and Brian De Palma nominated for Worst Director, which, again, did you even watch the movie? Why give them any credence by talking about the Razzies? I know, but they're just so lazy, because how can you look at that movie and say Nancy Allen and Michael Caine give two of the worst performances of the year and Brian De Palma worst director? Like, talk about a movie that is directed, man.
Yeah, yeah, the Razzies are really stupid. They should call them the Lazies, since you said they're being lazy.
I like it.
Yeah, it's, it just shows that basically horror in any form, whether it's like a super, sexualized thriller or, a classic slasher or, creature feature, like they, back then, obviously they weren't respected as any sort of viable or legitimate art form. I think it was just like for so long with the Razzies, and I don't even know if they still exist to this day, because I kind of stopped paying attention years ago. But it just seems like they would just basically find one or two horror movies to always hone in on, because horror was always a good punchline, because, everybody, thought horror was a joke, but, we know it's not.
Right.
But yeah, it's just weird. Like, I just, how do you go from because I think Nancy Allen was even back then they had a Golden Globe nomination for best new star or something like that. So how do you go from being nominated for a Golden Globe from the same movie to being nominated for Razzie, which I think we've seen that several times over the years, and it just proves that the Razzies are incredibly stupid and they deserve nothing from us. I did want to mention, and I'm gonna hopefully I don't screw up how to say his name. I did want to mention the score from Pino Donaggio. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Yes. Yes. I know it was funny because Brian being Italian, I was like, am I saying that right? He was like, yeah, sure. He's like, I don't know. I grew up in Connecticut. But I think it's fun because obviously he and De Palma worked together quite a bit throughout De Palma's career. And it's like listening to it now, I definitely hear hints of Carrie in there.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But I'm okay with it because it almost becomes like sort of a touchstone of a De Palma movie. Mm-hmm. So now I almost want to go back again, because I haven't watched Blowout in so long. I want to see if do we get you would know, do we get those little hints in Blowout or in, again, it's been a long time since Body Double 2.
You definitely in all of them, because Pino Donaggio's scores for Brian De Palma movies all have that dreamy quality, because De Palma wants to let you know that you're watching a movie, and that's one of the things that I love about him as a director, is that all of his movies are sort of about being movies, and the scores are often used not in the same way, because in Carrie and Dressed to Kill, not only do the two scores sound kind of similar, the themes in particular, but they're being used in the same way, right? Because they both open with this sort of dreamlike shower sequence, and the music is complementing the vibe on screen. But I think a lot of his collaborations with De Palma have a similar feel. But Dressed to Kill and Carrie are definitely the two that I think are the closest.
Have you ever heard his rejected score from Snake Eyes?
I have not.
Okay, I was just curious if that exists out there in the world. I figured if anybody would know, you probably would know.
Yeah, no, I have not. I would love to hear it. There's so much about Snake Eyes that I want. You know, there's a whole like third act that got deleted that I'm dying to see. I wish the way that Scream Factory did that restoration with Raising Cain, I wish somebody would do with Snake Eyes, because I think I like Snake Eyes a lot, but I think there's an even better movie there that unfortunately got kind of compromised.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually forgot that he'd also done the score for Seed of Chucky, which I actually think is a really fun score.
I completely forgot that he did the score for that.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty fun. I don't think he did Bride of Chucky, but I know he did Seed of Chucky, because I do remember that. But yeah,
his score for Tourist Trap is amazing.
Yes.
So good.
Actually, we actually just rewatched that like a few weeks ago, and I was like, wow. I was like, that was really fun.
That movie rules.
I didn't really remember a whole lot about Tourist Trap, because I saw it again pretty young, and sometimes when you're a kid, some things land, some things just kind of come and go, and so I was kind of glad to rewatch that.
So now you can see that the House of Wax remake is basically a Tourist Trap remake.
Yes, as opposed to a House of Wax remake.
Right.
I mean, it is, yeah, but yes, I totally can. So, yeah, but no, it's, again, it was one of those, when I was like doing this, I totally forgot that Kino had also done the score for The Howling.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also another one that I really, really enjoy, you know. And I know you're a Dante fan, so.
It turns out I am. It's fun to be able to talk about all my favorite directors.
I think if he would have if he would have just done a Hooper score, I think he would have hit like the whole bingo card of Patrick directors.
And whoever directed the pilot for Tag Team, I think that would have been everybody.
That's going to be your new favorite thing in the world. I'm so excited for you.
That and DC Cab.
I know. I'm serious. We should watch it, because it doesn't really fit for Corpse Club, but we should do an SS movie episode on it.
Okay.
I'm not even joking. We should do this. I'm so in. It's
on the pilot for Tag Team or on DC Cab?
Both. We could do both. We could try, we could just make it work. We'll find a through line. It's fine. It's all fine.
Anything else about Dressed to Kill that you want to say?
No, it didn't make me have an appreciation for fashionable gloves, though.
Well, sure. How weird that the guy puts the glove on, by the way.
Right?
He finds this woman's glove. I know.
In a woman's glove.
He finds her glove, and the first thing he thinks is, I'm going to put this on.
Like for real? Because like sometimes like I have like my good gloves that I'll wear to like Sundance when I know I have to be like really warm. But I keep like those like crappy stretchy gloves like around. Like if we're going to go do things here in LA when it's cold, but it's not cold. And so there have been so many times, because we don't have heat in the office. So Brian will be working in the office and he'll be really cold. So he'll try to like throw on my gloves for a few minutes, and literally his ginormous man hands will just pop right through them. And I was like, how did this guy put this woman's glove on? And it's so dainty and petite. I was like, no, I was like, if the O.J. Simpson trial taught me anything, it's like, that's just not going to be a thing.
To be fair, he's delirious with VD.
That's true. So he doesn't really know.
No.
Does VD make your hands smaller?
Gonorrhea has just eaten away at his brain and made his hands smaller.
I guess. So kids, just watch out for the gonorrhea. That's what I say that because it was a thing from American Dad. So that's how I say gonorrhea.
I knew it would be either American Dad or Family Guy. So
yes, there's an episode where she's talking about his gonorrhea. So yeah, it's funny. It's an episode where Roger has two dueling identities.
What?
They're at war with each other.
What?
Holy crap. I just made that work. It is. So Roger goes to use his credit card, and his credit card is maxed out because his other guy's been using credit card. So he starts stalking. Oh my God. So he starts stalking the guy. And he's like, I'm going to ruin your life and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out it's one of his personas that got out of hand and started living out a life of its own without him realizing it. Holy crap. Is that episode all about Dress to Kill minus the killing?
Really sounds like it.
Holy balls. I can't believe I just did that. Wow. So random. There you go.
Good job.
Look, I do what I can. Look, I was just excited when I watched Rad a few weeks ago, and I realized that there was a sequence in American Dad that was obviously a Rad reference, and it made my heart skip a beat. And I was like, now it all makes sense, because I knew it was a BMX movie reference, but I just didn't know which one because I'd only ever seen BMX Bandits. And then it was like, as soon as I put the two and two together, I got really excited. So anyway, now you can go back and watch American Dad. I forget which season it is, but it's the one where Roger plays two different versions of two different characters, and he has to wage war with himself. So there you go.
All right.
Look at that, making it all work.
Well, thank you guys very much for listening. Hopefully you're enjoying all of the Class of 1980 content at dailydead.com. Make sure you're checking it out all day, every day, I should say. Make sure you go to corpseclub.com, find out how you too can become a member of the Corpse Club and unlock exclusive bonus content and get cool stuff. Thank you, as always, to our engineer Brian for editing the show, and thank you, Heather, for being my horror BFF.
Well, thank you for being my horror BFF. I appreciate it. And I'm so glad we got to talk about some De Palma finally.
Me too.
Not that we need an excuse, but we've been so busy with all the remakes and stuff that we've sort of gotten away from I don't want to say the fun stuff, but so this was nice.
This was a nice change of pace, and it allowed us to put off talking about I Spit on Your Grave just a little bit longer, which is kind of nice.
Yay!
Until next time, everybody, stay scary.